Hi, everybody. I'm Lance Albertson. I'm the director at the Open Source Lab at Oregon State University. I'm a director. I'm really a sysadmin by trade, and I kind of feel like I'm a cat herder most of the time. And I don't mean cats literally. I mean all the people I manage kind of cats. So a little bit more about me. I've been at the Open Source Lab since about 2007. Mainly been doing their system stuff for many, many years. And then in recent years, I've kind of moved my way up into management. I have a lot of experience in virtualization, specifically with Ganeti and KVM. That was interesting. I have a lot of experience with CF Engine, Puppet, and we just recently started switching things over to Chef. I also have a lot of experience mentoring undergraduate students in system administration and FOSS development. And in a past life, I've been a Gentoo developer for many, many years. So I've been a part of the FOSS community for a long time. So that's a little bit about me, so you kind of get a context of me. What this session is going to go over is kind of talk about the current learning environment we have at the lab and kind of what's been happening over the last 10 years. Or I guess how it really is out in the real world. And then I'm going to talk about the OSL student experience and how that kind of relates. And then after that, I'm going to talk about DevOps Bootcamp, which is a program that we started this year as a big experiment to kind of get more students involved that we couldn't hire. And then kind of talk about where we want to go with it. So what's the current learning environment for students that are in universities? It's kind of, not good. The problem is that a lot of CS programs are focused on theory, which is kind of what they do. But they don't really have a lot of applied thought on how to, do these things. We see so many students, and I remember when I was going through school, it was difficult to understand how these things really related. Classwork just rarely fit with what the real world was doing. And oftentimes it was so far behind what the real world is doing as well. It was difficult for students to kind of see, oh, that's what he's talking about. Now I can understand and kind of go further. And so it's really, really difficult to get students kind of to understand the DevOps theory, system administration, that sort of stuff in the university environment. It just never was really good. Also, student jobs kind of suck. Most universities, you'd be really lucky if they even give you some kind of console access to something, because they have really strict guidelines on, what kind of access can you do, what can you do. They're really strict and anal about it. There's also limited access to these jobs in the first place. Most of them are just help desk jobs. That's basically what I did when I was in school. And you don't really get to learn about system administration. I was lucky that my boss at the time was really into Linux, and he's like, well, in your free time when you're not working on stuff, go play with Linux. That was awesome. And also there's really no structure to kind of learn about system administration, being a FOSS developer. There's some groups out there that maybe can help it, but there usually isn't any kind of structure. And kind of related to that, there really isn't a lot of opportunity for really good mentoring. With this profession, it's really, you learn basically on your own, but you also learn from peers that that already know the type of industry. And in the case of the university, the staff and faculty probably aren't a good resource for system administration and DevOps. They're really focused on the theory, so where do you go? Well, you can go to Linux user groups, but they're not really a solution. I would say most Linux user groups are, just a bunch of folks that are just hanging around, kind of learning things, and it's not really a good structured approach. Here's what you need to know. You need to learn this. You need to kind of, dive into this. And maybe some LUDs are better than others, but in general, it's just not the best place to kind of learn about it. And there's no really centralized program on campus usually to be like, you go to this place if you want to do this kind of stuff. You have the trade-off of the students that maybe have learned it on their own and they want to just have a job or do something to kind of hone their skills while they're at campus. Or you have the environment or the students where they're newbies. They're like, well, this seems interesting. I'm kind of intimidated by it. I don't know where to start. What can I do to learn more? And so you kind of have to facilitate both of those needs. And there's also the case of limited amount of qualified staff and time from the staff to mentor the students. Most of the time they're probably putting out fires for things related on campus. They really can't walk a student through a complex problem, or they may not want to give them access to it. So it's really not the best environment for students to kind of learn about DevOps in general. So let me kind of talk about what we've done at the open source lab over the last 10 years. For those of you that don't know what the OSL does, we provide infrastructure hosting for medium to large, high impact projects. So if you go to the Python Software Foundation site, that's going to the OSL. Any of the Apache project sites is at the OSL. Drupal.org is at the OSL. Any of the Linux Foundation sites is at the OSL. I can keep going on and on and on. And what we really provide is pretty unique in the industry, where we're really hands-on and we tailor each hosting need for the project. Some projects just need simple co-location. In the case of the ASF, that's all we do. We pull hard drives in and out, put servers in and out, that's it. We don't manage any of their systems. But then some smaller projects that they don't really want to do system administration, they just want some simple sites. We'll maybe have a VM spin up and we have some services running on it. And then we manage the machine with that. So we kind of made our own cloud per se. I didn't start calling it a cloud until a few years ago, because it really is a cloud, I guess. But we essentially have our own virtualization environment that we use. We offer managed hosting with configuration management or just unmanaged hosting, depending on what the project wants to do. And we do the typical email, DNS, mailing list type of stuff, which most projects need. We also have a development team that over the years has gone back and forth on the type of projects they work on. But most of them are tied towards supporting the hosting that we do at the lab. So some of the things that we've started doing is actually giving them root on our stuff, which we hadn't done before, which is kind of scary. But it's been great. I've had several students that started out as developers kind of realize actually being system administrators as well, and they actually understand why we are so anal about things sometimes. So it's been really, really great. And so we have, I think the team, we also have a media communication team that kind of helps with our website, all that stuff that we don't have time to talk about all the awesome stuff we do, so I created a small little student team that does it. So we finally have a website that updates a little bit more than once a year. But overall, our team is about 15 to 18 undergrad students typically, and then we have about 4 full-time staff that work that mentors all these students. So here's a view of the NOC, where all the action happens. I kind of made the OSL, well, I didn't make it, but I kind of run the OSL kind of like a small startup within university. So even though we work at the university, we kind of have a startup culture, at least we try to. So I give the students a lot of freedom. So for example, they get full root access, which is kind of scary, especially if they log into a box and they're like, this is Drupal.org, and they freak out. We've had funny incidents in the past where some projects use the same naming scheme, and you get a request, well, we want you to reboot this server, and end up rebooting the wrong server. So they learn about these things, and most of the projects that we host completely understand, and most of the time, they don't even realize that students are helping them out. It's great. So it generally takes us about 6 months to get a student spun up to the point that he can kind of go on his own, so to speak. And it really kind of depends on the experience level of the student too. We have kind of a rigorous interview process that we typically don't hire students that are really green and they have no idea and they just started using Linux. We typically hire students that have already used Linux a little bit, which means all those other folks that don't know Linux that much, how do we get them going? And how do we kind of get them to the point where we can hire them? So on the mentorship part, the full-time staff helps mentoring, but then also some of the senior students help mentor, so they get experience with that, which is great when they go out into the real world and they have to do the same thing in a team setting. Typical work stuff that they do is, support tickets come in, something's broke, need to install this, blah, blah, blah. And then they interact with customers via email and IRC pretty easily. All in all, they get a real world experience essentially working at the OSL as close as possible, which is then your perfect environment that students need at a university to learn this type of stuff. And over the years, many of our students have excelled and moved on to great careers out in the industry. One great example of that, how many of you have heard of Core OS? So That was started by 3 OSL student employees. Alex Polvey, Mike Marino, and Brandon Phillips, all OSL student employees back in the day. I find it hilarious that they brought the team back together, so to speak, and they're working on Gentoo again. So that's a great example of, what type of students come out of the OSL. We also have students that work at Google, IBM, Intel, Facebook. I could keep going on and on and on. There's a whole bunch of them. So they get amazing opportunity. And so I treat them like a full-timer, and I try to give them ownership of a project of some kind. Hey, fix our backups. Or, hey, this, the way we're managing this certain thing sucks right now. Can you fix it? And I kind of basically had a student help with a lot of the chef stuff we've been working on recently, which has been really great. So the problem we have is we can only hire so many students, and we can only mentor so many students. But we have so many other students that are interested in learning this. So what are we going to do about that? And some other problems are we have to balance the full-time employee ratio to student ratios. We don't want to have too many students that the full-timers have to mentor, and then they can't actually do the work they need to do. So we can only hire so many. It takes a lot of time and resource to really put into mentoring a student. It can be a little frustrating sometimes at working in a university setting because we're lucky if we get a student for 2 years. So we have quite a bit of a turnover rate. So you spend 6 months getting the student up, and then maybe a year and a half later they move on and graduate. So it takes a lot of effort to do that. Another interesting point is that the students that we have at the OSL represent maybe 1% of the total computer science population at OSU. So there's all these other students that might be interested that we just can't help, teach them more about DevOps. And obviously budget constraints to hiring students. We do pay our students. We don't make them do slave labor and not get paid, so they do get paid. And there's only so much work that can be done. Granted, we do have a long list of things to do, but at a certain point, we have to have more full-timers to kind of manage the more complex problems. So that's when we, earlier this year, decided to try to do something called DevOps Bootcamp. And that's the website. I'll have the URL at the end, too, if you want to check it out. So what this came out of was actually something that the Portland State College of Engineering computer team did up there. They basically had a weekly meeting, and they were really focused on system administration stuff. They're really in-depth on very specific topics. They'll spend a whole evening talking about the very specifics of DNS and how it worked. And so it was a really interesting way of getting a lot of students. They started out with 60 students are there. That's crazy. And they opened it up to anybody. They didn't have to be in the CS program. They could be philosophy, whatever. And they actually had a couple of students that did that, excelled through the program, and now they're in a career doing DevOps type stuff. And they kind of have a different system on how they do their team there. So they kind of have a graduated system where some of the students that do really well in the Braindump start out as a help desk support. And then from there, they get into being a non-router access. So they have access to the systems, but they can't maybe manage passwords or things like that. And then eventually they get to become a router. So they're really super, understood and trusted. It's a year-long program, and I thought it was really interesting how they had it set up. And I'm like, well, can't we do something like that at OSU at the OSL and maybe fix some of our scaling problem of getting more students interested? So we sat down and we wanted to see, well, what can we do? We didn't want to use the same name. We kind of come up with something different. And I thought, well, DevOps Bootcamp was a good name. So we went with that. So some of our goals was obviously we want to teach about system administration skills. That's kind of important. And then we also want to talk about FOSS development. So basics of, here's Python, here's frameworks, some web frameworks, here's some simple security things you may need to know about, and kind of move through that. So we're trying to mix both system administration and FOSS development. And then eventually we want to, merge the two and kind of start talking about the DevOps philosophy, and saying, there's these, you kind of need to have both to kind of do anything in the world right now, and it's really needed. And we wanted to also publicize all the content. One of the problems with the Portland State University crew is that they really didn't publish or make anything. They kind of did it on the fly. They're like, okay, we're going to talk about this, so I'm just going to dive in a terminal and we'll go through this, which is great. But then if you want to have somebody go back and kind of read over it again, it doesn't really work that well. So we wanted to make sure we had content that we could reuse, that other people could use, and we could refine it and make it better. So that's kind of what we ended up doing. And we also wanted to eventually integrate it into the computer science program at OSU somehow. That's a long process if you've ever been in academia, but this was a nice way to be like, well, we'll do this on the side. We don't have to deal with the policies and everything, and we kind of see how things go. But eventually what we want to do is have a specific track about DevOps, basically. And this is kind of an experiment to see how that goes. And we also wanted to make it really easy for anyone to attend and contribute and kind of see what's going on. A lot of times students can't really make it because of midterms, or the time slot we pick for that term doesn't work. They still want to do things, so we kind of try to make it work. So how does the program look? Right now we have it set up as a weekly meetup. I think it meets on Thursdays, actually today. And we talk about a specific topic. This year we kind of started a little late, so we aren't quite on many of the topics I wanted to get to at this point, but we're still catching up. We also kind of have a weekly content planning meeting to make sure that we're all on the same page. We all are talking about something that makes sense. That is, kind of one of the goals that we want to talk about. And then we try to come up with some simple exercise that they can get hands-on and do, work with and kind of understand, oh, that's what this is about. We try really hard to combine lecture and hands-on. Sometimes we'll have maybe half lecture and then the rest of the hour, or we usually have a 2-hour block. And then the second half of the 2 hours is hands-on. Sometimes we do it back and forth, so maybe we have a couple of slides, show something. All right, now let's do a hands-on thing, see where you're at, and kind of stop and go. The program itself is driven by basically all of the OSL staff, so not only the full-timers, but also the students that really know the content. A couple weeks ago, we had one of our students talk about networking in the first couple of layers, so it was really cool. As far as communication goes, we use normal, open source kind of tools. So we have a mailing list set up, we have an IRC channel, and we also have the lug, which is a great way to kind of get folks to kind of maybe meet outside of the weekly meetings and so forth. So here's a picture of one of the meetings we had early on at OSU. So tools, what do we actually use? So obviously we use Vagrant. Right now we're doing a mix of CentOS and Debian VM, so they can get a feeling for each operating system. We're using GitHub, obviously, as well. So we have exercises, we have all the website up there. We have some scripts to kind of help folks along if they got behind, so they can kind of set up the environment. And then we also created the whole site and all of the slide documentation. There's a Sphinx stock and hieroglyph, which is actually what this presentation is using right now. So it's all in text. You can do forking. You can do whatever you want. It's all in one repository. So it makes it really, really easy to see the content, update it, and just do what you need to do. One thing that I started at the very first one is I wanted to record the session somehow. And on a whim, I'm like, well, you can do screen recording with Google Hangouts. We'll try it. It's not completely open source, but we'll try it. And it actually ended up working pretty well. So we just log in with the OSL G+ page, do a Google Hangout Live, and then it automatically records it. And so we just do a screenshot in the audio and it catches it. So a lot of our students have liked that. So we have all the past ones up on YouTube now, if you check it out. Sometimes you've had issues where the Wi-Fi would die on us, but overall it worked pretty well. And something else that we haven't quite implemented yet is OpenStack. So obviously running VMs on workstations and laptops kind of suck. So eventually we want to kind of do more than one VM that they work on, kind of a cluster. So we're working on getting an OpenStack cluster set up so they actually have access to a cloud. And maybe we'll work on, maybe some public clouds as well. So still trying to work out how that's going to work, but we're working on that. As far as the curriculum goes, we cover the Linux basics, system administration, development methodologies. We talk about the basic infrastructure services, DNS, email, web servers, and so forth. And something that I don't know if we'll get to very much at the end of this term, but I really want to do is kind of create a mock infrastructure. Kind of for a mock company of some kind. I mean, these days, yeah, you would use Gmail and all these other services, but if you want to know how these things work, you need to build it yourself and kind of see how it happens. And so, I know that's how I learned, and I like having an environment. So that's what we're going to try and do, and that's where OpenStack will probably come into play. but we'll have like a set of servers that do some functionality and so forth. We'll also introduce configuration management. We'll talk about both Chef and Puppet and maybe some others, but just kind of introduce that philosophy. And a lot of this content is also based on a computer class, a computer science class that me and a colleague taught over 5 years ago now, I guess. In 2009. But we're kind of adapting it for this, because obviously a lot of things have kind of changed since then. So that's kind of the basics of the curriculum. And kind of what we've talked so far is the basics, shell permissions, editors, and Git. We did some scripting and troubleshooting to kind of work through that, and so forth. Talked about services, how you deploy a web app at a very basic level. I think we had a Flask web app that we created. It was really basic. It's actually on the GitHub repo. Don't cringe at it. It was something that basically runs PS to kind of look at stuff running on a system, but it was an interesting way to kind of show how things tie between a website, what happens on a system. I talked about the boot process and the file system hierarchy as well to kind of understand that. I mean, now in the cloud world, you don't maybe need to worry about it, but it's good to probably know about it in the end. We talked about databases briefly, and then more recently we talked about security and authentication and networking, and we have more topics to go forth. So on the mock infrastructure, I want to build a breakable infrastructure and have these students kind of play around with it. It's best to kind of have that real-world experience. Like, be like, well, why is my email not working? Well, how do I read email logs? How do I know about all of that? Since I mentioned earlier that a lot of these students will have access to an environment where, oh, this is production. Let's see how this works. They want to have something they can break and they feel like they have access to. With the university not giving them access to production, they can't quite get the full effect. The OSL students certainly get that. When things break, they really understand it. Last week, I was actually on vacation when all the Heartbleed stuff started happening, and it was just amazing. They took care of all of it. It was awesome. Some of the ideas that we had was getting a DNS server going, getting some basic email, a website, and a database. Maybe have the folks that were interested on the development side create a basic web app that the system administrators and other folks can deploy. Utilize some configuration management to manage all of it, and then put it out in the cloud, whether it's OpenStack, AWS, or whatever. Still trying to work out this whole thing, and I don't think we'll have it completely ready at the end of this term, but we'll at least have the framework ready, I think, for it. But I think this is a great way to kind of learn. And this is kind of something I thought a lot about when I started learning about Linux and system administration. I had to learn it on my own. Probably a lot of you had to do the same thing. You don't really learn about this stuff in school. I actually don't have a degree in computer science. I have a degree in agriculture, if that doesn't make any sense. And so I learned a lot of it. And a lot of it was just on your own. But then it was also about having that support community there that actually knew what to do. I had a friend at the time that knew enough about Linux that we would try things out and do these crazy things. And there was a lug, but it wasn't that active. But that was really the way to kind of get things going. So some of the ideas that the DevOps Bootcamp is a community of people that can kind of go together and kind of say, well, here's what you can do, here's what you can learn. And here's a neat little thing maybe you didn't know that the system could do, or that the web app can do, or languages can do. The mock infrastructure gives them a safe place to kind of play around, and really gives them the idea and feel like, here's how cloud services work. Here's how, developing a web app and managing a system come together, and so forth. I think we'll probably need to do some pre-configuring, because the last thing we want to do is have all of these new students get into it and realize, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. It's too much to worry about. Kind of having a pre-configured system to start out with and then tweak it is kind of a good way, and then kind of walk through things. And then, you can maybe introduce some things that are already broken and have them figure it out. Well, why isn't that working? And have them work through the workflow and kind of figure that out. So there's a lot of things I think you can learn from breaking things. So far, we've had some really good attendance. Our first meeting, we actually went over the capacity of the room. But then after that, we kind of had meetings that were generally between 10 to 20, but it's more like 15 to 20 students that are there each week. I think overall the format seems to work. Vagrant and VirtualBox is great, but as we all know, they're a pain in the rear. I actually got to see how it works on Windows for the first time because I've never used Windows with Vagrant, so that was fun. The Google Hangouts thing is great, but it's kind of buggy. It'd be great to have like an open source thing that I can use to actually do that. Having everything in Git is awesome, obviously. Makes it really easy to collaborate and push things up. It takes a lot of time to work on content. We actually had to cancel today's meeting because several of us were traveling to different conferences. We still had our main student that worked on this still at PyCon coming back tomorrow. So we kind of got lost track of things. So, making the content make it really good is really difficult. A lot of these students are pretty new to it. They're pretty green. They're not at the point where, they're usually not the students that have already used Linux a lot. So we have to make sure that the content fits that audience. So I know that we call it DevOps Bootcamp, and they maybe not understand the DevOps part yet, but they'll get there. They're definitely getting there. We started way too late, but that's something we can deal with later. And we needed to be flexible. There was a lot of times when we kind of realized the students weren't really doing much, they weren't interacting, and we realized we just needed to have a work session where we didn't talk about anything, we just sat down and we just worked through things. And that was really, really good. So we're probably going to introduce that a lot more as well, just to kind of get people caught up. Because we were starting to lose a couple people from attending because they felt like maybe we were going too fast or they didn't understand, and so forth. And one of my best principles that I love is keep everything simple. Don't make anything overcomplicated. There was many times in the content planning meetings where we talk about, we can do this, we can do that, and I'm just thinking, we have to keep this simple. If we get it too complicated, people just won't understand. You got to understand your audience that you're talking to. So I think it's been going pretty good. So what do we want to do coming forward? Obviously, we want to make more content. We want to tweak it. It's in a very experimental stage. There's a lot of content missing. At some point, I want to integrate outside speakers that kind of talk about their experiences. We've had several companies in the Portland area that want to come down and talk about their experience. I don't think the students attending now are quite ready for that, but we're getting there. We also want to get contributions from outside of the OSL and OSU. So if you guys are interested in helping, that would be great. I guess one thing I forgot to put in this slide, and I do know that there's what is it called? There's another similar program out there that basically, it very focuses on system administration. Ops School, that's what it's called. It's still in its early stages, but it's almost too verbose for these students to really understand. So I think that'll eventually be a great resource, and we can contribute to that. But this was intended to be a very basic, hey, you probably are interested in this, let's get you at least started and get the ball rolling, and so you can, say, I like doing this, I want to learn more, what can I do? And I've already mentioned about the curriculum, addition that we want to do. And I really would like to get other universities involved at some point. We work closely with PSU, but it'd be great to kind of talk with other universities. So if any of you are in academia and they want to talk to me, let me know. So that's basically my presentation. If you have any questions, let me know. It's still a very experimental program. It's just getting started. There's been a lot of interest from a lot of industry that I've talked to of supporting the program. It's very much tailored fit for what we do at OSU, but it could easily fit other places. So any questions?
So I'm trying to put together things with my old alma mater. Hi. So I've tried to put together even just programs or even like topics classes with my old alma mater, and there's always a pushback about non-tenured professors and using adjunct faculty, and that's a really delicate balance. Do you see any pushback from the rest of the university because of things like that?
Yeah, that's been something that I think with OSU it's been unique because the OSL has been there so long, and we've proven to them that this works, that we haven't had as much pushback. But I remember not too long ago, they were like, well, why are you doing this hosting and so forth? And that's like, because we give students experience and it's, good for the, what we're doing. And then also, they're all about, well, we're not a trade school. We don't teach, trades. We're about teaching theory. And so I think it wasn't until we got them in front of a lot of the more DevOps-friendly companies that were interested in maybe giving them money to kind of support such a program, and then they're realizing, oh, there's a demand, and students can get out there and do that. So it's a lot of work. You have to kind of work from both the top and the bottom and get a lot of support. Each university is different. I know this would be kind of difficult to do in my alma mater for a variety of reasons, but I think OSU has just kind of been unique because it's kind of been the center of open source, so to speak. We've had that benefit with having Portland nearby as well. But just keep working on it and just kind of say, well, hey, there's this other program. Maybe you can talk with them and give them the experience of what they've been doing and kind of see what's going on. So that's kind of my thing. Be patient and persistent.
So love the talk and wanted to know what your email server was and your scripting language servers that you were allowing these fine folks to start with.
So we'll probably go over postfix is what we use at the lab. It's the easiest thing to kind of work through. I don't want to put them through SendMail. I did that at my old job. Maybe say, hey, here's how the old people or the old school people used to do it. Actually, still use it. Most of the scripting stuff has been in Bash, and it's inside of the Vagrant VMs that we've spun up for them, basically. So it's been on a CentOS VM or a Debian VM. Nothing that big. On the scripting thing, we came up with an example of, well, here's some code that you did in Bash, and you didn't put any of these conditionals in, here's what you need to do. And then we did the same thing in Python. And then we kind of said, well, here's how the things work between the different languages. And yes, they can learn a lot of this in their classes, but actually seeing it applied was interesting. And then the flip side of it was then we took that same idea and turned it into a web application. And then we introduced security problems, like, well, what happens if you do this? We actually had a hard time telling Flask not to do, something bad, but we were doing it to kind of show them, here's how these vulnerabilities actually work. And it was interesting. They're like, oh, wow, that's what's actually going on. So we're trying to keep things simple.
So a lot of the things you've been talking about are more just straight up system admin. I was wondering what type of DevOps, like automation, things like that, you were teaching these students that is more actually towards a DevOps thing versus a system admin. I know it's key that they know how to actually log into a system and run the scripts manually, but they also need to know how to automate. So.
Yeah, we haven't quite gotten that far in the curriculum, but I think that'll definitely happen in the configuration management phase and right before that. So we'll say, hey, we're doing all these things manually. Wouldn't it be great to kind of automate it? And then we'll kind of work through all of that. So maybe we'll start with some simple scripts to automate it. And then from there, we'll kind of talk about, well, we have this web application. How are we going to deploy it? And we've kind of hinted at that already. Like, well, what would you use? And kind of work through, like, here's what we used to do, here's kind of a new way of doing it, and kind of working through that. I agree, I call it DevOps Bootcamp, and it's more of a sysadmin/developer type thing, but it's kind of working towards the goal of getting to the point that they finally kind of understand, automation is important, configuration management is important, writing your application scalable and secure is important, and so forth. So we're getting there. Does that kind of answer your question, or? Okay. Any other questions?
What's the funding relationship you have with OSU?
The funding relationship between us and OSU. That's an interesting question. So the OSL has been primarily funded through donations over the years, mostly corporate donations. It's essentially been on soft money funding. But we also have some support contracts for some hosting that we have with some state agencies that we do that are related to hosting applications that are open source for them, and some larger projects like the Linux Foundation that we basically build them for rack space at cheap costs. And so we have a variety of ways of getting funding through that. We don't get much direct funding from OSU itself, and we've always been that way. I mean, obviously we get the benefit of working at the university and sharing the resources, but we don't necessarily have a budget line item from OSU directly. But we're housed on campus. We are employees of the university and of the state. So we get all the benefits, that the state benefits get, all that is, we're all on the same university. It's just our funding source comes from nothing directly tied to OSU. Yes, so in the last 10 years, we've resided in the Information Systems Department on campus, which is a non-academic unit. And it was just because of the people that started the OSL over 10 years ago, it's where they worked. And then over the years, that's just where we stayed, but it kind of made us wanting to do anything academic related difficult. I don't know if you've been in academia, but it's just the way things are. And so we finally got to the point like we need to fix this. We need to get the OSL in the right place. I mean, most of the students are in ECS. It fits with that program better. Let's do it. And so we recently, last fall, actually organizationally moved under the computer science department in the College of Engineering. So what that gave us access to was we finally had access to a full-time employee that works for the College of Engineering on their foundation account, so I can close the donation deals that I had a hard time doing before. And then other resources such as all the industry connections they had. So we got much better connections to folks like IBM and Intel, which is in our backyard, saying, hey, we have the OSL now part of ECS. They can do the hosting and the student interaction, but then we also have research potential if you want to work on a project. So we've kind of been working with Intel and IBM on that type of stuff, and that's really been an interesting relationship.
Has there been any interest from faculty inside the College of Engineering looking at labs and resources?
Yeah, that's actually another interesting topic. So, we've been really externally focused over the years because that's what we really want to do, but the campus really hasn't fully utilized us, and so we're trying to change that. There's another unit on campus called the Business Solutions Group that kind of does the same stuff we do, but they focused more on .NET, and then they write applications for OSU, but they actually want to do more open source stuff. And so we're trying to actually merge with them, so to speak, and create a software center to kind of help the university with those research projects that maybe open source software can help solve. So random researcher needs some code to kind of do this one thing. They'll work with the BSG and the OSL to kind of work on a project, and then everybody's happy kind of a thing. There's not a central resource for doing programming on campus for research stuff. So that's something new that we're trying to get going. It's not officially going yet, but that's kind of a new thing where we're doing. But throughout all of that, I'm going to make sure the OSL still does the hosting, and that's what our primary focus is, and we're not going to start doing .NET coding and so forth.
Last question. All that terabytes of bandwidth that you're hosting all these other projects, is that donated by the university?
No, we actually pay our provider for that. We have, with our mirror network, we have 3 servers, one in Corvallis and then one in Chicago and one in New York. So those other 2 are hosted from TDS Telecom. We pay for the co-location, but they donate the bandwidth for free. So we get free bandwidth on those machines, and that's how we work that out. But everything else, we pay for our internet connectivity. And actually, our internet connection is completely separate from OSU. We're essentially like another academic unit in the state network. So, which is kind of good, because I don't have to deal with their network policy, so to speak. But it's like if they break their core router, it doesn't bother us, and vice versa. But it's also weird when we have to work on projects with them because we appear outside of their firewall. So there's always that fun problem.
Cool. Well, I think we're just about at time, so let's give Lance a nice round of applause.